Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video. In this video I'll be doing a bit of a different sort of casting video here. Now with my Survivor casting videos, I've done pretty realistic themes in my opinion. I've done Heroes vs. Villains 2, Second Chance 2, Legends, but now let's do something a bit weird. Let's do Survivor Jeff Probst's dream season. So what I'm going to be doing here is making a theoretical cast of who Jeff Probst would put on a season if he had 100% control over who was going to be on that season, with no like outside factors really factoring in here. So essentially it's just whoever he wants on a cast is on the cast. Because usually with these casting videos, I try to be somewhat realistic. I try to only include people that want to come back or people who production seems to want to come back. But here, none of that's going to matter. It's solely based on what Jeff Probst wants. And I think it's a fun idea, so let's do it. Now I will say for this video, I did a lot of research, probably more than I'm willing to admit, on Jeff Probst. I read a lot of interviews with Jeff Probst to get a good gauge of his opinions of a lot of players, and that's really how I made this list. And this is a pretty tough list to make. I mean, to be honest, like I made a short list, and the initial short list was 60 people, so I had to cut it down a lot. Obviously, I made a cast of 20. And the way we're going to go through is we're going to go in chronological order and talk about who I thought would be contenders and who actually did end up making the cast. So let's start off with Survivor Borneo. So at Survivor Borneo, there are a couple people I considered. The main ones here being Greg and Colleen. And again, they're two people who have been asked back multiple times, probably will never come back. However, I didn't put them on this cast. And the reason for that is because, again, I kind of feel like they're more in production's favor than Jeff Probst. Like, Jeff Probst has personally never really said anything about wanting Colleen back or Greg back. So because of that, I didn't really put him on this list. Richard Hatch was obviously in contention, but considering he's not even all winners, I don't think it's very likely that Jeff Probst would want him back for his dream season anyway. From Survivor Australian Outback, there are a few contenders here as well. None of them did make the cut, though. I did consider Colby. I think Colby was the big consideration for me. Obviously, Colby used to be Jeff Probst's favorite. However, I kind of realized that Colby's never mentioned in any like recent Jeff Probst interviews. Like when he's asked about his favorite players, he never mentions Colby. And I'm wondering, is Colby like out of Jeff Probst's favor after Heroes vs. Villains? And I'm kind of thinking he probably is, and that's why I didn't put him on the cast. Someone like Jerry is someone I did consider. But again, it's another person that he hasn't really talked much about, so I didn't put her on. And Elizabeth is someone that production has been wanting back and has asked back multiple times. But again, I feel like Jeff Probst has never talked about her, so not really going to consider her either. Next up was someone I really considered. I was very surprised I considered him this much, and that is Ethan from Survivor Africa. And he's really the only person from Africa I considered, but I was actually very surprised at how pro Ethan Jeff was in interviews. And obviously Ethan is back for Survivor 40, but one of the things that I did for preparation for this video was look at the Hall of Fame ballots that Jeff Probst did in previous years. And there were 2 years in a row where he put Ethan on his ballot. And he talked very highly of Ethan, talking about how great of a player he is, obviously how great of a person he is. And that actually really surprised me, as I didn't really think of Jeff as a big Ethan guy. But that was in 2013. He hasn't really mentioned Ethan that much in more recent interviews. And that's kind of the reason I decided to leave him off the list. Though, again, it was really tough, especially for the males. I feel like there's a lot of males that could have made this cast, I mean, as you would expect with Jeff Probst. So, I mean, he was probably 11th place out of the top 10. Now for Survivor Marquesas, there's someone like Gina, who Jeff Probst was very openly a big fan of, someone he's still friends with to this day, I believe. But someone that I don't think he particularly thinks is worth bringing back. I don't think it's someone that he has much interest in seeing play again. However, I mean, the biggest lock on the board of this entire cast, I mean, if you know Jeff Probst, come on, Boston Rob's on this cast. I mean, there's no question Boston Rob's on this cast. I think, like, I mean, really, if we wanted to make this video a complete joke, we could just say Jeff Probst's dream cast is 20 Boston Robs. And to be honest, that would be kind of accurate. But obviously, Boston Rob makes the cut. That was no question. Now for Survivor Thailand. Come on. Now Survivor to Amazon. The only person I think he would really consider is Rob Cesternino. And I put him on the cast. And I didn't know what to do with him, to be honest. Initially, he did not make the cast. However, again, I did research, and he's talked about Rob Cesternino a lot in interviews, talking about how great of a player he is. He was on his Hall of Fame ballot. He also did a list, like I think a couple years ago, where he talked about like 10 of his favorite players of all time, and Rob Cesternino was on that list. And that was something that did surprise me, but I do think he's someone that Jeff Probst is particularly interested in seeing back. I do think Rob Cesternino would make the cut, though to be honest, he's probably a bit lower on out of the 10, but I do think he probably makes the cut here. Now for Survivor Pearl Islands, obviously a couple contenders here were Savage, obviously someone that Jeff Probst was at least at one point very good friends with. I don't know if he's still good friends with Savage, but I don't know. He never seemed super high on Savage on Cambodia, so he's probably not making the cut. And same thing with Rupert. Rupert's someone that's obviously loved by the casuals, but I do feel like Jeff Probst is kind of anti-Rupert at this point. I think it's kind of similar to how Jeff looks at Ozzy at this point too, where he thinks that they just have nothing else to bring to the table. And yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the case. So Rupert didn't make the cut either, but Sandra makes the cut. I think that was pretty much a lock. I mean, almost every single list that Jeff Probst has done on favorite players has mentioned Sandra. She's someone that obviously has a great relationship with production. She's back on Island of the Idols right now. There's no question for me that Sandra would be on his dream cast. For Vanuatu, I mean, I don't think anyone, right? I think the only contender that would be kind of funny is Julie Berry, but I mean, no, it's not going to happen. Now for Survivor Palau, and I really considered a couple people here. I mean, Tom was someone that obviously was in consideration, and it was tough. It was tough with Tom. I didn't know really what to do with him. I mean, Tom is someone that Jeff Probst clearly loves, but I don't feel like he makes the cut here. I think he's not really someone that I think Jeff Probst has much interest in seeing play again. Again, it was between Tom, Ethan, and another person we'll talk about a bit later. I feel like that other person has been mentioned more frequently, more recently than Ethan or Tom, where Tom hasn't really been mentioned in a lot of recent interviews with Probst outside of a top 10 winners of all time list he made a couple years ago. I also considered Ian. Ian's someone that they've been trying to get back for years and always says no. But again, I think that was kind of part of I try to distinguish Jeff Probst from production, where again, production-wise, I do think production wants Ian back, but Jeff Probst personally hasn't really talked about Ian too much, so he didn't make the cut. However, the person from Palau that I did end up putting on the cast is someone that I was a bit unsure of until, again, I was reading the interviews, and it became very clear that I had to put her on the cast, and that is Stephanie LaGrossa. And the reason why I was a bit hesitant to put her on is just that, like, again, Jeff Probst hasn't really talked about her in a very long time. She's not really someone that gets brought up that much modern day. However, looking at the Hall of Fame ballots, with this one, I believe being from 2011, he explicitly says, if I was making an all-star season, she would definitely be on it. So it's like, well, he literally says that, so it's like, I guess I gotta put her on. And if I'm being honest here, the female field was a bit tough. It was a bit tough to put together. Again, the males, there were just too many that he said that he would like to see back. The females, there just wasn't enough. Like, I mean, there was probably like 7 or 8. And filling in those last 2 spots was a bit tricky because there were kind of a lot of people on the short list that could have made the cut, but we'll talk about some of those people a bit later. Now from Survivor Guatemala. Come on. I love Guatemala, but it's very clear Jeff Probst doesn't, so I don't think anyone's being considered there. Now for Survivor Panama, I did consider Terry Dietz. However, I don't know. I feel like Jeff Probst has never loved Terry Dietz as much as some other people, and really, realistically, I think he loves Tom more than he loves Terry Dietz. Considering Tom didn't even make the cut, Terry Dietz is definitely not making the cut here. But I did put Suri. Suri's another one that he's mentioned in almost every list that he's made. And I think Jeff Probst loves this idea of like, oh, this woman just came off the couch and played Survivor. And it's like, okay, yeah, I think Suri makes the cut. Now from Survivor Cook Islands, I did consider Yule. Yule is another one that made his top 10 winners of all time list. But again, like the Tom thing, I don't feel like that's necessarily a guarantee that he wants them back on his dream all-star season. And really, he hasn't mentioned Yule outside of that, so I kind of left Yule off. Penner was someone that would be fun, but again, Penner's another one that he hasn't really mentioned in any interviews or anything. Like, it seems like he has fun with Penner while he's out there, but again, hasn't really talked about him since. And one of the bigger locks on the board is Parvati. I mean, he talks about Parvati all the time. I mean, pretty much every single list of favorite players of all time that he's made, Boston Rob, Parvati, and Sandra are the first 3 that he mentions, so I think there's no denying that Parvati would make his dream cast. Now from Survivor Fiji, there's not really many people here. I know he loves Yao Man, but again, Yao Man's another one that he hasn't really mentioned that much recently. I don't think that's happening. And I thought it would be funny to consider Jessica DeBen just because she is someone that Jeff Probst at one point said that he would like to see return. But again, not on his dream cast. From Survivor China, I didn't really consider anyone outside of Amanda. Amanda is someone that was on his Hall of Fame ballot at one point. But again, she's another one that I don't feel like he's really mentioned that much recently. And he didn't have an explicit statement of, oh, I'm going to cast them on All-Stars if I could. And so it's like, I just left Amanda out. But really, she was probably the number 11 spot. It was between her and another player we'll talk about in a little bit. Survivor Micronesia, I think he would consider Eric. I think Eric is someone that, again, he really loves that Eric blindside in Micronesia. He talks about it all the time. But I think he's more impressed with the people that pulled off the move than the person the move was made on. So I don't think Eric makes the cut. And Natalie Bolton would be fun. I don't think she makes his cut at the end of the day either. I think if she did, she would probably already be on an All-Star season. Now from Survivor Gabon. Again, come on. He's not picking anyone from Gabon. Now for Survivor Tocantins, which is one of the bigger short lists from a cast. I do have 6 people on the short list here. I did consider JT, but considering, again, he's not on all winners, I don't think he would make the cut. Steven is someone that Jeff Probst has mentioned as one of his favorite players. However, I believe that list was from before Second Chance, and he hasn't been mentioned post Second Chance, so I kind of left Steven off. Taj is someone that production's been wanting back for a while, but he's never explicitly said it himself, so didn't put her on the cast. Sierra is another one, same thing. But I did end up putting Tyson on the cast, and that was one of the harder males to cast for me. Because to be honest, I didn't expect Tyson to make the cut. However, I was just reading interview after interview where he would mention Tyson out of nowhere. Mind you, a lot of these were either a year or 2 out of Blood vs. Water. But he's mentioned Tyson more times than I actually thought he would. And again, more recently than someone like a Tom or an Ethan. So I decided to put Tyson on the list. But to be honest, that's probably one of the more shaky spots here, especially for the males. And also from Dokachis, I put Coach. I mean, again, I feel like Coach is a no-brainer. I feel like Coach is someone that obviously Jeff Probst loves. He mentions Coach a decent amount of times. To be honest, not as much as I was expecting, but he does mention him a couple times in his favorite player list. Considering obviously how massive of a character he is, I think Coach definitely makes the cut. Now from Survivor Samoa. Now, I mean, I didn't know what to do with Russell. I mean, Russell and Richard Hatch were 2 people that, like, I could see them being on Jeff Probst's dream cast, but at the same time, it's like, I feel like he doesn't like them. Like, he just simply doesn't like Richard Hatch. He doesn't like Russell. And because of that, I decided to leave them out. But to be honest, if like Jeff Probst were to do this exercise himself, I wouldn't be surprised if he did put Russell Hantz on the cast. But I don't really see that being something that he would do, especially because we have another player later on that is very similar to Russell. Also did consider Shambo because, I mean, Jeff Probst has mentioned a couple times that he loves Shambo. And Shambo's another one that's been asked back and has said no. But I didn't really end up putting her on the cast. Nicaragua, there's not really anyone that I would really consider there at this point, so let's just move on. Redemption Island, I did consider Philip. Philip is someone that Jeff Probst has mentioned multiple times. But to be honest, he just simply didn't really make the cut, especially because he hasn't been mentioned more recently. But I did put Andrea on the cast. And this was one of the more wonky females because, to be honest, I have no real proof that he would want Andrea on his Dreamcast. And that's kind of where I wavered a bit. I didn't know if I should put Andrea or Amanda. That was like kind of the final cut there. While he hasn't really talked about Andrea outside of like recap sort of interviews, I do think Andrea is someone that he does have a good relationship with outside of the game. I think that's shown through a lot of the interviews that Andrea's done with Jeff Probst. And I feel like that's enough to where, like, also, I think he also thinks she's a pretty good player. He stated that in the past. So I think, like, mixing all those things together, I think that puts her on the cast. Though, to be honest, it's not a very solid one here, but I did think she made the cut. Now for Survivor South Pacific, I did consider Jim Rice, because Jim Rice is someone that Jeff Probst has talked about really liking. But again, he hasn't really mentioned him since the Second Chance voting, so didn't put him on. However, again, one of the bigger locks on the board. I mean, Jeff Probst has openly said that this is his favorite winner of all time, one of his favorite players of all time. I mean, Cochran. Literally 0% chance that if Jeff Probst had his way, that Cochran would not be on the cast. From Survivor One World, I did consider a few people here, actually. I considered Troyzan. Troyzan is someone that, surprisingly, Jeff Probst has mentioned in his all-time favorite player list. Mind you, this was before Game Changers. So I think, like, after Game Changers, I think that's probably not the case anymore, so I didn't put Troyzan on. Sabrina is someone that production's been wanting back for a while, but to be honest, I haven't really seen Jeff Probst himself mention Sabrina too much, so that's why I didn't put her on. Chelsea is surprisingly another one that, like, Jeff Probst has mentioned quite a bit. I was actually kind of surprised by that. that he's mentioned her in his favorite player list like a couple times. And I did consider putting her on the cast over like Andrea. But I just feel like Andrea is more of a presence nowadays than Chelsea is. And I feel like Jeff Probst will think of Andrea before he thinks of Chelsea in the modern day. Again, I could be wrong on that. For all I know, Chelsea makes it on instead of Andrea, but I would decide to go Andrea instead of Chelsea. But someone I did put on from One World is Kim Spradlin. And something that I did not actually realize until I reread all these interviews is just how pro Kim Spradlin Jeff Probst is. Like, in all of his favorite winner lists, he's mentioned Kim Spradlin. And he's also mentioned her in his favorite players list. And that actually really surprised me. Like, I never thought of Kim as someone that Jeff Probst actually really liked. I think that's kind of shown in some of my older cast speculation sort of videos where I mention Kim and talk about how I don't feel like production really wants her back. I feel like that was kind of misguided, as I just didn't realize how much Jeff Probst has mentioned Kim Spradlin. And obviously, once I realized that, I do think Kim Spradlin makes his dream cast, which is someone that, to be honest, I wasn't really expecting. Now for Survivor Philippines, and I had to make some tough cuts here. I mean, there were a couple contenders here. I thought Lisa Whelchel is someone that Jeff Probst has a good personal relationship with. I don't think she makes the cut, though. Jeff Kent is someone that Jeff Probst has talked about liking. I believe actually he's another one that for some reason he mentioned in one of his all-time favorite player lists, which is just strange. But again, I don't think he makes the cut nowadays. And I had to cut Malcolm. I really wanted to include Malcolm. It was actually really tough, but there's just a couple people that we'll talk about a bit later that I feel like are more openly loved by Jeff Probst nowadays, that are also in a similar archetype to him, that I just felt like it would be really tough to fit him into this cast. Though, to be fair, I think you could take out like Tyson and maybe put in Malcolm, and maybe that would be a better fit. But for the sake of this video, I did end up leaving Malcolm out of the cast. Now for Survivor Karamoan, come on. Now for Survivor Blood versus Water, I did consider a couple people. I know Jeff Probst is very high on Hayden at the time of the season. However, he hasn't really mentioned him since, and he's someone that hasn't been back on the show despite there being multiple opportunities, so I don't think Hayden makes the cut. Brad Culpepper was someone that I think production loves. I think Jeff Probst loves him as well. However, I was reading some interviews from post Game Changers and didn't really get a great vibe from Jeff Probst on how he felt about Culpepper post Game Changers, as he kept on talking about like, oh my god, Brad Culpepper made such a big mistake taking Sarah to the end, like what an idiot. It's like he kept on like harping on that decision, even though again it was a very minor decision, even though again like him against Ty isn't like a sure thing either. But yeah, I don't know, I just don't know how he feels about Brad Culpepper right now, so I decided to leave Brad off because of that. However, I mean, again, one of the bigger locks on the board is Sierra. I mean, she voted out her mom. I mean, come on. Really, there's no question. I mean, like, I believe Jeff Probst has made it her his winner pick twice, right? I believe for Cambodia. I might be wrong on the Cambodia one, but I know for sure he picked her for Game Changers. I mean, he very clearly loves Sierra. He's never really tried to hide that. She's mentioned on all of his recent, like, favorite player lists. I mean, like, there's no question Sierra is going to be back there. Now for Survivor Cagayan, I did consider Cass, but I don't know how Probst really feels about her right now. Like, he hasn't really talked about her in a while, so left her off. But I did put two people here from Cagayan, two people that Jeff Probst likes to mention a lot, and the first one is Tony. I think that's one of the bigger locks on the board. I mean, he mentions Tony a lot. And again, considering I wouldn't put Russell on this cast, I think Tony fills that spot anyway. Yeah, Tony has made his favorite winners list. As of a couple years ago, was in his top 10 players of all time. So I do think Tony makes the cut here. I also put Spencer on the cast. And Spencer's someone that I knew he loved at the time. However, I was kind of undecided on, does he still love Spencer now? Like, would Spencer still be in his dream cast? And I decided on yes. And I decided to put him on. I think the main thing for me with Spencer was just how much Jeff Probst openly loves Spencer. In multiple interviews, he's mentioned Spencer as one of his favorite players of all time. He's mentioned Spencer as one of the best players to never win, alongside Rob Cesternino. Like, I think like it's very clear that he loves Spencer. Spencer seems to still make his list after Cambodia, so I decided, you know what, I think that's enough. I'm putting him on the cast. Now from Survivor San Juan del Sur, I did consider Jeremy. However, the thing about Jeremy is that even though, I mean, it's very clear that he likes Jeremy, I don't feel like he mentions Jeremy that much. Like, Jeremy is someone that isn't really ever in his, like, favorite players of all time list. So because I decided to leave him off, though, again, I could see Jeremy actually making a cut. But I did end up putting Kelly Wentworth on the cast. And this was another tough call for me because Kelly Wentworth is another one that he doesn't really mention that much, even though it is clear that he likes her. But the thing that did make me decide to put her on the cast was the fact that Kelly Wentworth was Jeff Probst's winner pick for Edge of Extinction. So because of that, I did end up putting her on the cast. From Survivor Worlds Apart, I did consider Mike. However, supposedly Mike isn't really in the greatest terms with production right now, even though Jeff Probst has said in the past that Mike is one of his favorite winners of all time. But yeah, I just decided not to put Mike on the cast. Max is someone that production really loved at the time of the season. However, I think his relationship with production's definitely severed a bit, so didn't put him on. Carolyn is someone that I think production really likes, or at least some of production. I think Jeff Probst likes Carolyn. However, I didn't think it was enough to really make this cast. Jeff Probst loves Haley as well for some reason. Again, didn't make the cut. And same thing with So. But I did put Joe Anglim on the cast. I didn't really want to. That wasn't my initial thought. However, I keep on coming back to the finale of Edge of Extinction, where Jeff Probst openly asked Joe, do you want to come back, and that sort of stuff. Like, it just seemed really forced and really strange for him to do. And I kept on going back to that. And also, I was just reading some interviews from Edge of Extinction. He talks so highly about Joe's physical prowess that I was like, you know what, let's put Joe on the cast. And now for a co-wrong, I did consider a couple people. I mean, Ty was someone that I considered, but again, Ty is someone that I don't really hear Jeff Probst talking about too much more recently, so I didn't put him on. I didn't put Sydney on the cast, though. Sydney is someone that production clearly wants to play again. But considering Jeff Probst forgot to ask her a reunion question, and also the fact that he hasn't really mentioned her that much recently, I decided to leave Sydney off the list. But I did put Aubrey on the cast. Yeah, I mean, if you can't tell, there's kind of a trend of Edge of Extinction returnees here. That does end with Aubrey. I didn't put David on the cast. But Aubrey is someone that I think Jeff Probst, again, very clearly loves. He literally changed the final tribal format to make sure someone like Aubrey can win. But I did have trouble putting her on the cast because, again, she's someone that he very blatantly loves before Edge of Extinction. But I don't know how he feels about her after Edge of Extinction. I tried to read some interviews, after her elimination of Edge of Extinction. He didn't seem super high on Aubrey during those, but didn't really seem low enough to where I would consider her out of his good graces. So I did still put her on the cast, though. That one's a bit questionable for me. Next up, from Millennials versus Gen X, I did consider a couple people. I think Hannah is someone that Jeff Probst has liked, but again, not really enough to put her on the cast. Michaela is someone that Jeff Probst has really liked, but I do think after Game Changers, I didn't really get a good sense of him loving Michaela still, especially enough to put her on this cast. David is someone, as I mentioned before, didn't make the cut. I think we already have a Cochran. Do we also need David as well? Jay is someone that Probst has openly liked, but again, he hasn't really mentioned him that much recently. But I did put Zeke on the cast. I think Zeke is someone that Probst has very openly liked. They go to Zeke during random reunion shows. I mean, I think it's very clear that Jeff Probst likes Zeke. And I mean, the fact that they cast him right away for Game Changers right after Millennials vs. Gen X, I think is also a sign of that as well. So I thought that was enough to put him on the cast. From HHH, I did consider a few people. I considered Ryan, I considered Joe, I considered Chrissy, considered Lauren Rimmer, considered Allie. All people that Jeff Probst has openly liked. But again, they just simply didn't make the cut. And I also cut Ben. And the thing about Ben, this is the thing. Ben is someone that obviously production loves. I think Ben is someone that would be back almost every All-Star season that he's asked. However, I was actually kind of surprised by how subdued Jeff was about Ben. I was reading the finale interview where he talked about Ben, and while he was complimentary, obviously, I mean, he's the winner, it didn't seem like he was super high on Ben during that interview. I was kind of surprised by that. And again, considering the male field here was already really, really tough, I did decide to cut Ben for another player we'll be talking about very, very soon that he more openly liked. From Ghost Island now, we do have a couple contenders, a couple people that I considered, like Donathan, like Michael. I did consider Kellen, didn't make the cut. Dominic was someone that I think you would expect on the cast, but I didn't put him on. However, I did put Wendell. And Wendell is someone that Jeff Probst, again, very clearly likes. Wendell was his winner pick from Ghost Island. And also, Wendell was very high in his estimations after the season. Like during the finale interviews, like Jeff Probst openly says, I would love to see Wendell play again. And I feel like for me, that's enough to put him on the cast over someone like Ben, where again, Ben, like you think of him as like Jeff Probst's favorite, but there's no real clear proof to that. Well, I feel like with Wendell, there's clear proof. Again, there's interviews where he openly says things like this. I feel like is more proof for me that he would make the cut than someone like Ben's. So I did put Wendell on the cast because of that. So now we're on to the final few seasons. There's only one more spot left, and it's for a female. And I think if you know Jeff Probst and have read his interviews, you know who that person is. But there were some surprising cuts here. So let's go to David vs. Goliath. We have some surprising cuts in someone like a Davey, who he's openly like. Someone like a Christian, who he's stated is one of the best characters on the show. I mean, he's loved Gabby. He loves Natalie Cole. He even loves someone like a Natalia. But I think the biggest lock on the board here is Angelina. And to be honest, I couldn't find this interview again, but I remember reading an interview back around the time of David vs. Goliath where he was asked that if you can only have one person from David vs. Goliath come back, who would that person be? He instantly said Angelina over Christian, over Davey, over all these people. And I feel like for me, that was the clear indicator. He really loves Angelina and that she's someone that would be on this cast. I think that was very clear for me. So she does make the cut here. But now for Edge of Extinction, again, obviously no one made the cut here. I think obviously the biggest person here is Rick Devens. Rick Devens was someone that I was very close to putting on. To be honest, I was closer to putting Rick Devens on the cast than I was to putting Ben. Again, where Ben didn't really get that many compliments from the finale interview from Probst. Probst was very high on Rick Devens, even in the post-game interview. However, there was no real talk of oh, Rick Devens is definitely going to be on All Stars. Rick Devens is definitely going to be back. And I feel like when we have people like Wendell, where he explicitly says that, I feel like for me, that's more proof that I can bring to the table on Wendell than for Rick Devens. So it was tough to find a spot for him. And also the fact that we already have someone like a Rob Cesternino, we have a Cochran, we have Spencer, all these really intelligent guys that can already kind of fill the Rick Devens sort of archetype. Like Rick Devens simply just didn't make the cut. But if someone were to ask Jeff Probst to make his dream season, he did put Rick Devens on, that wouldn't be that big of a surprise either. So obviously there is still Island of the Idols, and considering that season's currently going on, I'm not really going to talk about too much, but to be honest, there's not really anyone on here that I think is a big lock. And considering I like to make these very proof-based, and there's just not much proof out there, I decided just not to really include anyone from this season. So that is the cast. So let's go over it again. We have Boston Rob Mariano. We have Rob Cesternino. We have Sandra Diaz-Twine. We have Stephanie LaGrossa. We have Sari Fields. We have Parvati Shallow. We have Tyson Apostle. We have Coach Wade. We have Andrea Belke. We have John Cochran. We have Kim Spradlin. We have Sierra Easton. We have Tony Velachos. We have Spencer Bledsoe. We have Kelly Wentworth. We have Joe Anglam. We have Aubrey Bracco. We have Zeke Smith. We have Wendell Holland. And we have Angelina Keeley. So that's the cast. That is the 20-person cast that I think Jeff Probst would select if he could handpick anyone who he wanted in all of Survivor history. And to be honest, I was expecting this to be a bit more of a wacky cast. When I initially created the idea for this video, I was expecting a really unrealistic cast that would never happen. But to be honest, I don't feel like this cast is that impossible. I mean, there's a few people here. I mean, obviously, Boston Rob would be tough to get back for an all non-winner season. Rob Cesternino doesn't want to come back. Cochran has openly stated that he doesn't want to come back. Someone like a Spencer doesn't want to come back. Even Aubrey and Kelly Wentworth might be tough to get back right now. Zeke is another one that probably doesn't want to play again. But to be honest, I expected this to be way, way out there. But it's actually kind of in the realm of possibility outside of a couple people. But yeah, I mean, I thought this was a fun exercise. Again, this was just a dumb little video I wanted to put together to see how this would turn out. So obviously, I will still continue to do more casting videos. I mean, I would like to try some more wackier ones like this one, but I'll probably go for some realistic ones as well. For things I don't know, Early Boots or Survivor Rivals or Blood vs. Water 3 or whatever. I mean, whatever. We'll see what happens. But for this video, that's everything I gotta say. That's who I think Jeff Probst would cast. So for now, thank you for watching.